All right, in our last video, we talked about political participation and reasons that can affect why a person votes or doesn't vote. So now we're going to talk a little bit about voting decisions and then get into elections and campaigns. So political scientists have suggested a few different theories on how individuals decide who they're going to vote for. So the first of those is rational choice voting. And this is based on what a citizen believes is in his or her best interest. So in this case, when a person's getting ready to vote, they're going to seek out information about candidates and the issues and then vote for the person that they believe best aligns with their interests and their opinions on policies. So voters are positive and want to see the policies that they favor enacted. The next is retrospective voting, and this is going to be based on an assessment of an incumbent's past performance. So in this case, the voter is looking at a candidate's past performance, their track record, the things that he or she has done while they've served in office, and then they vote based on that assessment. Next is prospective voting. So this is where a person casts a ballot for a candidate who promises to enact policies favored by the voter in the future. So a good example of this is when President Trump ran for office. Okay, he ran on the idea of building a wall. Okay, so he promised that a wall would be built on the southern border, and people voted for him based on that promise. Okay, because of that policy that he promised to enact in the future. And then last is party line voting. So this is voting for candidates who belong only to one political party for all offices on the ballot. So generally, when a person has a strong sense of party identification, so they align with one of the two main political parties, they're going to be more likely to make voting decisions based on that party affiliation. So when people identify with a party, they're generally going to agree with the positions supported by that policy. So they just vote for everyone on the ballot that is running as part of that party. All right, now let's move into political campaigns and elections. So these two are tied really closely together. So while we're talking about campaigns, we're also going to be talking a little bit about that election process. So looking at the stages of a political campaign. So it's going to start with a nomination campaign. Okay, so most candidates, if they're running for president especially, they're going to have held some sort of political office before. Okay, but most candidates for political office at both the state and federal levels are going to be nominated by their political parties. So part of the nomination campaign is when candidates are going to try to secure the nomination of their political party. So a good example here, this was before the 2020 election. So before Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee, he's having to go through that nomination process where there are several different candidates who are trying to win that nomination from the Democratic Party. And then after that nomination process, so once a candidate is selected, there is going to be that general election where successful nominees will compete for the presidency. So in this case, Joe Biden was running as a Democrat against President Trump, who was running as a Republican. Okay, so that is the general election. All right, so before the official campaign really begins, presidential hopefuls are going to start raising money because when we talked about the presidency, we know that it takes a large donor network for a candidate to be successful, contacting party officials and trying to win favor of the party elite. So obviously, if you are running for president, if the people who are at the top of your party are in favor of your candidacy, you've got a better chance of being successful. An exploratory committee might attract media coverage, which is going to allow the candidate to kind of test the waters and travel around the country conducting polls. So if you're wanting to run for the presidency, you're obviously going to have to get out there, see what people are talking about, what the issues are, kind of weigh out how people feel about you as a candidate. All right, and that will bring us to the nomination process. Okay, so at this point, voters are going to select nominees through direct primaries. So declared candidates from the same party are going to compete for that party's nomination, going back to the primaries prior to the 2020 election. So the Democratic Party are going to have several candidates running for that Democratic nominee. Okay, so you had Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. They were all competing for the party nomination. So most states are going to hold what are called primary elections, in which a state's voters are going to choose delegates who support a particular candidate. So in an open primary, voters can choose at their polling places to either vote in a Democrat or Republican contest. But in a closed primary, voters have to be registered as Republicans or Democrats in order to receive their party's ballot. In presidential primaries, these are held every 4 years, and this is where the parties are going to select their presidential nominee. Okay, some states are also going to hold caucuses in which party members are going to gather together to discuss candidates and select delegates to represent them in later stages of the nomination process. Now, don't get caucuses confused because we also talked about them in terms of Congress. So, two different types of caucuses. So, only about 1/5 of the states are going to hold caucuses instead of those primary elections. And it's essentially just a local meeting of party members. Voters will discuss and debate the merits of the party's candidates, okay, and then vote publicly by grouping themselves according to a candidate. And this is a really complicated and time-consuming process. So most states, including Kentucky, are going to hold those primary elections. The National Convention is going to mark the end of that nomination phase. So it's at the National Convention where the party will officially select its candidate to run for president. So in this case, at the Democratic National Convention, they selected Joe Biden to run for president in 2020 against then President Trump. So that brings us to the general election. So this is when nominees are no longer just speaking to their core supporters, but they're also going to have to try to appeal to independent voters and undecided voters. So the candidate is going to have to devise a strategy to address his or her change in audience. So you want to appeal to those moderate voters. So they might pivot on certain issues or soften their views to appeal to those voters. So they have to appeal to partisan voters, but not be too extreme one way or another. So you're trying to get as many people to vote for you as possible. So the people who would be kind of on the fence on which candidate they would vote for in an election, you want to appeal to those people. All right, and that brings us to the Electoral College, which I know for some can sometimes be a little bit confusing. So when you are voting in a presidential election, voters are not going to cast ballots directly for president, but for a slate of electors that are pledged to vote for a nominee. So the United States does not choose a president by a direct popular election, but by this Electoral College. So it can be best understood as 51 separate contests, each with a different size prize. So the Electoral College is defined as a constitutionally required process for selecting the president through the slates of electors in each state. 270 votes is needed to win the election. So the number of electoral votes that each state has is going to be the state's combined number of representatives and senators in Congress. So for the state of Kentucky, we have 6 representatives and 2 senators. So that means that we get 8 electoral votes. So remember that the House is reapportioned every so many years, okay, every 10 years based on that census. So sometimes the number of electoral votes that a state has can change. So this is just a look at a Electoral College map from the 2016 presidential election. So you can see that some states are going to have a whole lot more electoral votes than other states. And again, that has a lot to do with population because it is the number of House of Representatives and then the number of senators combined. So again, state of Kentucky has 8. And then a candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win an election. So more about the Electoral College. All states but Maine and Nebraska are going to use a winner-take-all system. And what that means is that the candidate who receives the plurality of votes wins. So, for example, in the 2020 election, President Trump received the most votes in the state of Kentucky. So that means that he received all 8 of Kentucky's electoral votes. Okay. So in Maine and Nebraska, this is unique because the popular vote winner within the state wins the 2 electoral votes associated with the Senate seat. And then each of the remaining electoral votes are going to be divided up according to the popular vote winner in each of the state's congressional districts. So it's just Maine and Nebraska that doesn't use that winner-take-all system. Electors are going to be chosen from party leaders and loyal activists. So electors can change their mind from the general election to the electors' vote. So the general election obviously decides the outcome, and then the electors vote in December, so from November to December. Electors who do not vote for the candidate supported by the majority of votes in their state are called faithless electors. Now, this has happened a couple times in the past where the elector hasn't voted for the majority of votes in their states, but this has never changed the outcome of an election. So electors are going to be dedicated party members that are chosen to fill this really honorary role and just vote for their party's nominee should that person win the popular vote within their state. If no nominee wins the majority of electoral votes, the presidency election goes to the House, with each state getting 1 vote, and a candidate can win the presidency without winning the popular vote. So this happened in the 2016 election. So Hillary Clinton actually won the popular vote, but it was President Trump who won the Electoral College and therefore won the election. All right, and last we're going to talk just a little bit about battleground and swing states. So in an election or in the campaign process, candidates are going to tend to focus on states with a large number of electoral votes whose votes seem to be in play. Some states are going to generally vote Democrat. Some states are going to almost always vote Republican, okay? Those states aren't the ones they're going to want to concentrate on. It's going to be those states with a large number of electoral votes that could really go either way. So battleground states are going to be those states where polls show a close contest between the Republican and Democratic candidate in the election. So it is very close. Swing states are going to be where levels of support for parties are very similar and elections tend to swing back and forth between parties. Okay, so meaning that the state is not always Republican or always Democrat. It goes back and forth in certain elections. So battleground and swing states are going to be the focus of campaigns and elections. So this is where we're going to stop with this video.